We are just about a week away from opening day, and I got the guys from Céspedes Family BBQ rejoining the podcast to break down the Atlanta Braves and their thoughts on the upcoming season. We'll discuss all of that on today's episode of Locked On Braves, so let's get into it.
You are Locked On Braves, your daily Atlanta Braves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, and welcome back to Locked On Braves, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, where we cover your favorite Atlanta sports teams each and every day. I am your host, Jake Mastriani. You can follow me on social media at ShortstopBall. Also, make sure you follow the podcast on social media at LockedOn_Braves. Send in any questions, comments, or feedback you have for the podcast. If you're new and watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. We're approaching 10,000 subscribers on YouTube, so you can help me get there as well by hitting the thumbs up button on this video. Thank you for all your support here at Locked On Braves. Got a special podcast for you today. Got the guys from Céspedes Family BBQ joining to break down the Atlanta Braves for the upcoming season. So looking forward to talking with them. Before we do, though, I want to remind you today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnMLB and use code all lowercase LockedOnMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, joining me today, we have Jordan and Jake from Céspedes Family BBQ joining me. They've obviously been on the show before. You're very familiar with their work over at Céspedes Family BBQ. Jake Mintz, Jordan Shusterman, host of the Baseball Barbecast, one of the best national baseball podcasts out there, and also writers over at Yahoo Sports. Guys, thanks for coming back on the podcast. Looking forward to our discussion today.
It's a pleasure. Before we begin, let's just say congratulations to Forrest Wall winning the job.
Yes.
Just got to clap that. Credit where credit's due.
Hard art.
Listen, whenever I join a podcast, or especially, on StreamYard, and I can give myself a little name, I go number one, whatever fan. Last time when I was on at the end of last season, I shouted out Michael Tonkin. But Forrest Wall is someone who I remember watching video of him in high school at Orangewood Christian. And this was very right in the beginning when we were in college. And I was like, ooh, the draft, get into the draft. And he was this really advanced infielder in Florida. And I was like, Forrest Wall's going to be the guy. He's going to be an all-star shortstop. And boy, did it take a long time for him to reach Major League Baseball. But when he finally did last year, I was like, oh, yeah, Forrest Wall. So I'm rooting for that guy. He's probably going to get, 50 plate appearances this season. But
Charlie Culberson was on the Braves bench for several months last year and got 4 plate appearances during that time. So we'll see how much playing time he actually gets, but it's well earned. Look, he had a great spring last year. He had a great year at AAA last season, and he had a great spring this year. So, he definitely deserves it. Hopefully he does get some at-bats in there, but it's going to be hard to break this Braves lineup. But looking forward to talking about all that. Before we kind of move forward, though, we got to go back, and we got to go back to last postseason. And everything that kind of fell apart with the Braves in the offseason. Jake obviously ruining the Braves postseason chances there when everybody was blaming him. But let's go back to the postseason for a minute. Realistically, what kind of fell apart for the Braves, in that run against the Phillies once again that you witnessed?
They didn't hit, right?
Yeah.
It's that simple. No runs in game one. 5 in game two, but remember, it was all late. They were really struggling for a lot of game two before that Austin Riley homer. 2 in game 3 and 1 in game 4. And so I think for the Braves last October is such a great example of why the MLB postseason is very rarely indicative of who the best team is. Because I think you could replay the season 100 times. I think the Braves would win the most games of baseball every time, right? Their offense was the best offense arguably we have ever seen. And for them to get pretty much dominated for 4 straight games by a very good, though not elite pitching group was, I think, just small sample size more than anything else.
And they weren't alone, right?
And me. Small sample size.
It was mostly Jake. Mostly Jake Paul.
Mostly Jake.
But right, they weren't alone, right? We saw the Phillies offense disappear in the next round. We saw the Dodgers another team with a historic top of the lineup do absolutely nothing, right? And so when you're working in these small series, but for the Braves in particular, you would think when you have that many good players, it would be harder to have that many good players not do something at, however many times you go through the order. But like Jake said, I mean, that's just the playoffs. So
yeah.
Yeah. And I think Braves fans also, like, Braves fans know this. In 2021, the Braves knocked off the Dodgers in the CS, a Dodgers team that had Turner, Seager, and Mookie Betts, right? Like, that was one of the most underwhelming relatively Braves teams we've had from an offensive standpoint.
Well, it's just funny to think about
the
Braves, which Braves carried them in 21. I mean, obviously you had Freddie and you had some stars, but like the guys that showed up and carried the Braves were not necessarily the kinds of guys that we look at now with the regular season stats that were through the roof. And so that's just kind of the randomness.
And I think that what I kind of liked, sorry, let me back up for a second. What is difficult about the postseason in baseball is that if you are a good team who loses in October, trying to figure out whether you lost because of bad luck and stupid small sample size randomness, or you lost because there's like an inherent flaw in your team is a very difficult line to toe. And I actually really like what Anthopoulos did this offseason, which was keeping the team mostly the same while identifying a couple areas of weakness where they could, like, a dumb GM might have blown it up. But also, you don't get to 104 wins if your GM is dumb, right?
Yeah. No, I agree with all of that. I think the short sample size, obviously. I do think the layoff affects offense. I mean, it's hard to look at the Braves and Dodgers last year, the two best offenses in baseball pretty much most of last year, and can't score after a 5-day layoff. I think that's part of it. It doesn't need to be an excuses, and teams got to figure that out. Braves have already said we're going to win the division again. That's what we want to do. We want that bye, and I still think that's the way to go. I think that plays into it. But I like your point, Jake, about what Alex Anthopoulos did this offseason, because if you look at one thing with the Braves in the postseason that seemed to be lacking, when you looked at the Braves and you look at the Phillies last year, Phillies play with a lot of confidence. They play with an edge. They play with a fire. You don't always see that from the Braves side of things. The Braves are very, I've used the term workman-like. They come in, they play every day, they do their job, and they know statistically over 162 that's going to play out. But in a short sample size, you got to have a little bit more urgency. You have to have a little bit more fire. And everything we've heard about Chris Sale coming over, he brings that. And I think that's somewhat of an underrated move from Anthopoulos and the Braves this offseason. But I wanted to get both of your thoughts on the offseason for the Braves. Jake, I know you kind of touched on it a little bit already, but what did you think about the moves made this offseason?
Yeah, I mean, Chris Sale, I listen, we just did our NL East preview yesterday, and we were kind of reflecting on how, in theory, it looks a lot of it is the same. But Chris Sale, now because of the amount that he's, I guess, not pitched, I would say, it's harder to be like, oh, they're adding 200 innings of Chris Sale. But because of who he is as a competitor, because of like what he kind of exemplifies as a postseason personality, even if that was kind of a long time ago now, that is a big deal. And, I don't know if that, does that exist? Do they really add that on offense? I don't know. I don't want to overrate that too much, because like when your players are this good, I don't want to put too much stock into that. But man, we've said this a few times over the offseason, baseball players love Chris Sale so much. And Jake, I know you went to Braves camp, right? So I'm sure you can kind of speak on that a little bit.
I don't think I even remember seeing Sale when I was there. I don't remember seeing him throw, or for whatever reason, but I think you're very right about him and the way that baseball players think about Chris Sale. Like, he brings the fire in a way that guys in the room respond to. And I think you make a really interesting point about like the Phillies and the Braves and how those rooms are built slightly differently. The Phillies are a chaotic roller coaster of ups and downs. Like, remember, their fan base had to rally around Trey Turner to like get him back to Trey Turner. Okay. There were low points for the Philadelphia Phillies. The Braves kind of just strolled through 162 games last year, and it's harder to like jump back up when you get into October, right? I think that is difficult. Now, does Chris Sale do that for the offense, which was really the problem? I don't know. I do think that like the addition of Jared Kellick in theory, when it was made, was like, let's bring a new face into this. Let's just not run it back with the exact same 9, which they easily could have done, right? I mean, they could have just kept Rosario, and he was on an option, right? They could have just picked up the
$9
option
million
here.
option. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they could, like, that wouldn't have been nuts. That could have totally happened and been fine. Now it's funny to say, yeah, they're bringing in some new faces when it's like 3 new faces, and it's really just the same team that's been kicking everybody's butt for the last handful of years. But I like the amount of position player depth AA brought in, because the one thing I think, and I said this on our podcast, the 2023 Braves were abnormally healthy on the offensive side and abnormally unluckily hurt on the starting pitching side, right? And I would imagine that both of those trend back to the middle. And so I think it was smart for Anthopoulos to add a little bit of offensive position player depth this winter.
March Madness is here, and we're not talking about baseball. We're talking about college basketball. That is here as well, and that means the biggest moments in college basketball are happening. Be a part of the action on PrizePicks for both men's and women's college basketball. PrizePicks even offers injury insurance, so you don't have to worry about somebody getting injured. If they don't play in the second half of the game, that player's projections don't count towards your projections, your picks there on PrizePicks. So you don't have to worry about that. PrizePicks also offers weekly promotions to help lead to big payouts. And PrizePicks, it's really simple to use. Even Jake can do it. The other Jake, not me. He can make picks and submit them an entry in less than 60 seconds. That's all it takes. If you're crazy like me, you want to wake up and, like these guys too, wake up, watch the series in Korea. You can pick more or less on Ohtani and Freddie Freeman, total bases, pitcher strikeouts, first inning runs, hits allowed, and much more with PrizePicks. And again, it is so simple. Just pick 2 to 6 players or a group of 2 to 6. Decide if you think they'll have more or less on certain stats like hits, RBIs, home runs, strikeouts, and more. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy. All right, guys, I want to jump right back into our discussion here, and I want to kick it over to Jordan, because we were talking beforehand, said he has some thoughts on Forrest Wall, obviously covering or watching the Mariners, following the Mariners very closely. So, Jordan, the floor is yours. What thoughts do you have on Jarred Kelenic? Should we be too concerned about this spring training for him?
The Kellick experience is one that, watching Braves fans kind of go through it, the stages from the time that they acquired him, right, at the winter meetings in kind of a shocking deal from a Mariners perspective, as that was part of their massive kind of offloading of money. Now, he was not the one making the money, but he was essentially a vehicle to trade away a good bunch of contracts so that they could, make room for some of the other moves they were going to make. A move that, by the way, is still not a good look for Seattle, regardless of whether Jarred Kelenic is good or not. That's a young outfielder that, if that's how his tenure is ending, that's unfortunate for everybody involved and just kind of a bad look. Now, as for him as a player and the spring that he's, of course, endured, it's the first place to start is he has been amazing the last 3 spring trainings, right? So that's part of it that the first part that I've been thinking over the last couple weeks, because I know, okay, what stock do we put in spring stats, right? And Jarred Kelenic in spring training has already been a story in the other direction, because we've seen him when he was trying to make the team initially before they sent him back to AAA, even though it looked like he had to be in the big leagues and he was definitely big league ready. Kelenic represents this conundrum of kind of evaluation where he was zoomed through the minor leagues. He's this top pick. He's this incredible prospect in this giant blockbuster trade. So the spotlight is on him, and he doesn't fail in the minor leagues to the point where, okay, all right, let's see it in the big leagues. But the Mariners are still kind of, jolting him around, and he just couldn't, it just wasn't happening. And you could say some of it was bad luck. You could say some of it was, he was overmatched, but I mean, the numbers are the numbers. Like the first couple of years, he was one of the worst hitters in baseball. Now, last year, you're looking at a line that if you didn't actually watch, you're like, oh, he was pretty good. He was okay, right? He was like a solid hitter. And I remember when they made the trade, I was like, oh, 109 OPS plus, like that's probably what you were hoping Eddie Rosario was going to do. Like he could do that and be on the minimum and play better defense and whatever. But that line is bolstered by an unbelievable April, followed by a lot of this, more down. He, kicks a cooler, misses some time. And it's just been so much with this guy. He's been through so much. Some of it is his own doing. Some of it is completely out of his control. And in theory, him going to Atlanta is like, great, pressure's totally off. But I think with the move to sign Adam Duvall over the last week and the decision to say, hey, no, sorry, we can't give you every day at bats, is something we talked about on our podcast yesterday, which is that if you're the Braves, it's like, look, man, our standard around here is we're the best team in the league, right? We were one of the best teams. We don't have time, even if you're hitting 8th or 9th, we don't have time for you to figure it out and absolutely stink. So while I still think they are going to give him a chance to hit against righties and to have this chance, it is a reminder that you don't get this cushion in a lot of other places. Like the Mariners really had a lot invested in him and they wanted to make it happen, and he kind of ran out of time there for a few reasons. But I'm fascinated to see how it goes, regardless of the trade or all the context. Like I am rooting for him because when he's on, it is fun. I think there's clearly a cap for what he can be because of his limitations on offense, but I don't know. Where's your optimism level at?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's obviously the Braves spent a lot of resources, a lot of money, took on a lot of money to get Jared Kellick.
Yeah.
I have a lot of trust in this front office. I have to believe they saw something in him that they said, we can fix this and get him going. Or I don't think they go through all the moves that they went through this offseason. They basically took on $24 million in payroll for this year to get Kellick. Now, he doesn't cost that much. He's a cheap player and going to be under control for a while. But they took on that much to get this guy. I have to believe there was a plan, something they saw that they could change on him to get him going. And it may just take time. I mean, it's 40 spring training at bats where I'm sure they are helping him make adjustments. So, I mean, I'm going to hold judgment until we're at least a couple of months into the season. The Duvall move, as you said, that one's a bit of a head scratcher because they told him you're going to get every day at bats. And then all of a sudden now you're not, after not looking very good in spring training. I wonder what that message that sends to Kellick, who it seems like he's very hard on himself and puts a lot of pressure on himself to succeed.
Yeah.
And then to have that kind of called out in the middle of spring training, I'm sure, he's human. That's got to be kind of a rough blow to take, even though he said all the right things. So I'm not ready to give up on him yet. I think I'm going to obviously wait and see the changes and adjustments that he's made. He's hit the ball in spring training. He hasn't had a big strikeout rate. It's just been a lot of ground balls to the right side. If they can get him to lift it, I think he can really have a big year.
Yeah. And I want Jake to follow up on this here quickly, but that's the thing is there's so much context when you're that high of a pick already and you're in a big trade and then another kind of unusual trade. But personality wise, Jared Kellick has been told you are going to be awesome at baseball from when he was 9, right? And he basically was until he was in the major leagues and he was really bad. And so when you want, it's just that just hangs over it. It's really hard. It's not that just Major League Baseball is really hard, but you can see it. It's a very human experience to watch him try and deal with this. And then when you have situations like last year where he breaks his foot kicking a cooler, striking out, and that at bat was like a 10-pitch at bat, incredible at bat against Yohan Duran. It's not like he looked like an idiot. It was like baseball's freaking hard. Sorry, dude. That's when he kicked the cooler. It was after that at bat, not after flailing at 3 sliders out of the zone, And so Major League Baseball is it's not going to be forgiving. So it's not making excuses for him, but it's a very human thing to watch Kellick go through this. He's still 24. It's just been, it's been a lot. It's been a lot. So I don't know, but Jake, I know we've kind of run into him before. I feel like you've actually talked to him a couple more times than me. So I don't know what you're.
Yeah. I wrote an article last year back when we were at Fox about him and Bryce Harper. Because it was when the Mariners were in Philly and Kellick loved Harper growing up and told me a story about how he skipped a middle school dance to watch Harper's debut. He didn't, or he left the dance early or he didn't go so that he could watch Harper play against the Dodgers in 2012. Right. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. You have some similarities to that in terms of, hyped young player, obviously nothing like Bryce, but I was like, did you tell him this? Did you go up to him? He was like, no, I didn't want to bother him. And this, I think, was before Bryce came back off the IL. Like, this is when he was having the elbow, I believe. I might be wrong, but it was right around then. And I just thought that was very interesting that Kellick was.
It was right before. Right before. Yep, end of April.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it was like, not that he was intimidated, but that there was a part of him that was like, that didn't want to go up and bother Bryce. I thought that was really revealing. And on one hand, it reminded me like, he's still a child. Like he's 23 years old, and none of us we're all intimidated to meet the people we look up to, obviously. But it just opened this light into him where I was like, I wonder, like, is it like a bravery thing? No. Is it like does he not have the confidence? Is he embarrassed? And when I asked Harper about it, Harper was like, oh yeah, he's got a really awesome swing. Like I've watched him like Harper clearly knew who he was. So I think so much of it for him is like, so when we talk about like change of scenery, guys, right? Usually a change of scenery means you're on a good team and now you're on a bad team and no one cares if you struggle because the team's bad, right? That's usually what we say. And for this, I was pro and optimistic when the trade happened because it was like, oh, well, he's lost in the shuffle and like he can be a 95 OPS plus guy and this lineup's still going to bang and whatever. But now in spring, it's kind of revealed to me that because he's the only thing that's different, there's going to be so much focus on him. And now my worry is if he needs some runway to prove it, to get into the flow, how much runway are the Braves really going to give him, right? Like if he runs a 78 OPS plus for 2 months, like they're not going to keep rolling him out there. They're just going to let Adam Duvall play. And so at that point, then what do you have, right? And so I think it's going to be a lot about Atlanta's coaching staff, okay? And how they keep Kellick confident and how they empower him to have success, even if it starts slow. And I have a lot of faith in that staff to do that. But I just think that's something to keep an eye on because it is a thing that for him specifically, like you have to monitor that because 1, he's a kid still. And 2, we've seen his past, like he kicked the cooler, he can be emotional. Right. So it's certainly interesting, but again, it is first world problems. There are 29 other baseball teams with much bigger fish to fry.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, he's going to bat 9th in this lineup, but
right.
Again, I think he puts a lot of pressure on himself. He sees, look, he's going to be batting essentially in front of Acuna, in front of Ozzie Albies, in front of Matt Olson, in front of Austin Riley. And, I'm sure he wants to contribute and be considered, all-stars like pretty much the rest of the lineup is. I think it's funny you mentioned he's still a kid. I mean, he looked up to Bryce Harper. That really kind of ages me because dude. I was, I was somebody who was like, watching Bryce Harper as he came into the league, which feels like just a couple of years ago. And now we have players that looked up to him. So it does give you a reminder. He is still very, very young. And it is, like you said, going to be a lot on the coaching staff, which is why I'm willing to give him some time to allow him to make some of those adjustments. The Braves obviously have figured things out on offense and launch angle and exit velocity. I mean, they led the league in everything last year offensively. And everybody up and down can absolutely crush the baseball. So I got confidence in the coaching staff to get him there. You mentioned how long will they give him? I think he's going to get a pretty long leash. Again, they invested a lot in him. He's going to be batting 8th or 9th in this lineup. Last year, Michael Harris was one of the worst hitters in baseball for nearly 2 months. And the Braves rode with him. They had committed money to him already. He had some back issues that really plagued him earlier in the year that kind of led to some of that. But they have the ability because of the rest of the lineup to let him, have a sub 100, OPS for a while and learn things. But again, it is going to be interesting to watch. And hopefully he does develop and become that everyday left fielder because every other position is pretty much locked up for the Braves for the rest of this decade. So if they can get left field solidified as well, it really takes out any work that they have to do in the offseason. All right, next, I want to turn the page to 2024 for the rest of the team. Talk about the NL East preview that the guys just put out on Yahoo Sports. We'll discuss that here next. You shouldn't have to worry when you buy tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seat. I don't know about you guys. I never buy a ticket anymore if I don't look at my view from my seat first. They also give you all-in prices. I hate when you go to these ticketing apps, you think you got a good deal, you go to check out, and they throw in all these other fees. Gametime gives you the all-in price up front so you know what you're paying. Buy tickets in second with just 2 taps. Gametime has deals on tickets right up to the start of the event. Find exclusive flash sales and sponsored deals on tickets for football, basketball, baseball, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. And the Gametime guarantee means you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section or row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app today. Create an account and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply again. Create an account, redeem code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, let's wrap up here, getting your thoughts on the upcoming season. I want to read a little snippet from the NL East preview. I don't know if you both collaborated on it or not. Jake's head was at the top there, so I'm going to assume that he wrote this part, but I want to read it because I agree wholeheartedly with it, and I've said it on the podcast. He says, even if everyone in Atlanta's lineup takes a step back, this would still be the best offense in the sport. It's nearly impossible to envision a scenario in which this team doesn't make the playoffs. How the Braves perform in the roulette wheel of October is anybody's guess, but with Strider, Fried, and a motivated core, I'm not betting against this group to win the whole thing. So the first part of that, it's hard to imagine Ozuna not regressing, Olsen not regressing, even Ozzie Albies regressing. I'm never going to say Ronald Acuna Jr. can regress because I think the sky is the limit for him. And if he wanted to do even better this year, I think he can. But it's hard to imagine some pieces in this offense not regressing, even if they regress to their career averages. Even if they lose a couple players to injury, I still think this lineup is enough to be one of the best in baseball. And like you talked about earlier, last year they were so fortunate. 8 of their 9 regulars played at least 138 games last year. There's likely going to be some players that get nicked up and injured and miss significant time this year just based on law of averages. Even if that happens, Jake, I think this is still one of the best teams, at least in the regular season, and it would take a lot, I think, for them not to at least get a wild card spot.
They won the division by 14 games. 14 games. That's so many games, dude. Like, I guess the Dodgers, Jordan? The Dodgers won the division by 16 games over the Diamondbacks, I think.
Yeah, but, that's pretty standard. Again,
the Phillies are really good.
Yeah. Phillies are really good, like, as Braves fans saw. Like, they were 14 games better than them. And so I think that October should be kind of put to the side, right? I'm a firm believer in it's just a totally different tournament that you have to back pocket when you're talking about the regular season. So let's talk about the regular season. The Braves team WRC plus, that's kind of the FanGraphs all-encompassing offensive metric, was 125, 100 being league average. That's like the highest ever, okay? Ever. Second in the league last year was the Rays at 118. There were only 5 teams above 110. So offenses are usually pretty bunched. If the Braves go down to like a 114, they'll still have the 4th best offense in the league. That's like an 11-point WRC plus drop, okay? What I'm trying to say here is I do agree that there will be some regression and there will be some injuries, but there will also be, like, I think Travis d'Arnaud is going to be better this year than he was last year. I think Sean Murphy is going to be better than he was in a lot of the second half last year. I think Michael Harris could just put a full season of that together. Like, there's upside here still, That being said, like, and I trust the starting pitching to be better than it was last year. Spencer Strider has been the unluckiest pitcher in the history of the sport, essentially, right? And I'm going to bet the over on, like, I guess the under on ERA, So I'm incredibly bullish, and I'm not fearful that this team. It's hard to see them being bad. That's where I kind of end up.
Yeah,
I would just add, the upside is really in the pitching. On paper, is set up to be so much better. And I agree with Jake's points about just the health probably balancing out. But yeah, on offense, okay, sure, maybe Matt Olson only hits 44 home runs instead of 54, and Ozuna only hits 30 home runs, right? I agree with you about Acuna, but I would say that Austin Riley, who was great last year, OPS plus wise, it was actually down from the previous 2 seasons, and he was striking a little bit more. Not that he had a bad season. But him and Harris, especially for what he did in the second half, the upside with Harris is still really sensational, and especially when you're talking about overall value. Especially, Riley has kind of brought that too as his defense has improved at third. But I think it's going to balance out and still basically be a guaranteed top 3 offense, if not top 1 again. So,
and then on the pitching side, right, beyond Strider, I think the Braves. I said this on our NL East preview podcast. Look at how many starts they gave last year to guys they weren't planning to give starts to, right? Heading into, and it is a good reminder that things can go very wrong very quickly. But last year it was supposed to be Strider, Morton, Fried, Kyle Wright were supposed to be the top 4. And Kyle Wright got hurt and Fried missed a lot of time. And they ended up giving, I'm looking at it right in front of me, 11 starts to Schuster, 7 to Dodd, 6 to Soroka, 6 to Winans, 5 to Smith Shaver, who is 12 years old, 5 to Yanni Chirinos, 3 to Colby Allard, 2 to Darius Vines. I don't think that'll happen again. I feel pretty confident in Fried being healthier than he was last year. It was kind of a freak thing. And so I think that I feel better about the Braves kind of that pitching staff being better this year than it was last year. Go ahead.
I'm just again, the simplest way to put it is they got all-stars Bryce Elder for 31 starts, and he's in AAA right now, right? He, and you give whatever, you obviously have Strider and Morton, but it's just so many more starts that you're planning on giving to better pitchers. Mm-hmm. Now, clearly they plan to give them to better pitchers last year too, so we'll see. But that's really where you can see some sizable improvements. Not to mention the fact that on paper the bullpen's also way better.
No, I think the one thing that Alex Gonzalez does, and it goes back to the point I think Jake made at the beginning, he didn't blow things up. Instead, he just created more depth. If there was one weakness they had last year, yes, it was the offense that let them down in the postseason, but you were missing Charlie Morton in that game 3 where you had to start Bryce Elder, who maybe was tiring at the end of a long season for him. You never really got into the bullpen. I think the bullpen would have been fine, but still he went out, he added to the bullpen, he added to the rotation and try to, make some smaller moves on the margins to set this team back up for better success in the postseason. Again, all right, we got to cut our conversation there. Jake, Jordan, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure that you follow them over on Céspedes Family BBQ, the baseball BarbeCast over on Yahoo Sports as well. They got their NL East preview out there. We read some notes from that. Make sure you go read the full thing over there on Yahoo Sports. But again, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Braves wherever you get your podcast, and we will talk to you next time.